speech and also to extend formal welcome speech.
Well, good evening, everybody. Respected Professor Haragopal and all our participants in this webinar. Now, with India completing 75 years of independence, we are holding this webinar. One more webinar was held on the 8th of this month, addressed by the President of CITU, Ahmed K. Hamlata. Now, we all understand that this is the 76th Independence Day. Now, this is the first time we are holding such webinar. So it is very important to realize that why we choose the 76th year, that is in completion of 75 years of independence, that we are organizing such webinar. Now, we all understand that the present government at the center, they are particularly taking the opportunity of completion of 75 years of Indian independence with some ulterior and political motives. Particularly the party who is controlling the government right now for the last 8.5 years. Their predecessors, particularly controlled by the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh in 1925, in various nomenclatures, they were always acted against the independence, and not only acted against independent India's freedom struggle, but their predecessors, of course, were hand in glove with the British colonial rule. Now, suddenly, in the name of Azadi Ki Amrit Mahotsav, they are trying to hoodwink the people. So we understand that this is the right moment for the working people, particularly the toiling masses of the country, realize what danger is lying ahead in front of us. Now, with independence, particularly from almost 200 years of colonial rule, after immense sacrifice of the common people, a lot of whom were working class, representing the working class also. Many common people also sacrificed their everything, including their life, after which the independence came. Now, through the independence in 1950, the constitution was adopted. And along with this came the parliamentary democratic system. Now, it is also a very important fact that the main theme of the constitution was secular democratic republic. And a few years later, the socialistic pattern of society was also included in the main theme. So with this understanding, the country traveled a long way. There were difficulties, there were problems, of course. Very serious debates were there, whether the economic freedom was really available in 1946 to our independence. Now, at this moment, the government who is ruling the country, clearly it is a fact that the main theme, that is secularism, democracy, and the federal structure of the country, these are all under serious attack. And this particular government is trying to form an autocratic, majoritarianism, and fascistic country with a suppressive attitude. Any voice of dissent is being suppressed rudely. There are so many examples I'm not going to. Now, so far as the bank employees are concerned, we understand that this is the part of the working class. And it is also a fact that before even independence, since 100 years, the first trade union center was formed in 1920. Since then, the working class, along with the struggle for freedom, they were also involved for emancipation of the common people. Struggles were there. So, including Trade Unions Act, many such acts was enshrined before independence. And after independence, to a lot of struggle, many such acts came into being. and for which the struggle of the working class was very important. Now, this government, apart from attacking all the pillars of the constitution, they are also trying to snatch away all these rights and privileges that have been established through a lot of struggles and sacrifice. So, for the bank employees, of course, we are concerned about our industry. We are concerned about our day-to-day working atmosphere. Along with this, we are also very much involved in the fight to maintain the pillars of the economic structure that is the public sector undertaking. Now, along with this, we also must realize the danger that is being coming over us due to this attack on the pillars of the democracy, which is very important and an integral part of this struggle. Along with our day-to-day struggle, along with the struggle for our industry, along with the struggle for our rights, we have to struggle to safeguard the constitution of our country and particularly the pillars of this constitution which are under attack. Now, we are very fortunate enough that we have with us an eminent person like Professor G. Haragopal. We are also thankful to him that he has given his consent to address this webinar. And we understand that with this webinar, we will be able to focus our fight in the coming days to safeguard the interest of the country, safeguard the interest of the constitution, as well as our rights that is being contemplated to be snatched away. With this, once again, I thank all of you and welcome you to this webinar. And we think that with this webinar, we will be enriched enough to continue our battle in the coming. Okay. Over to Comrade Sijananda.
Thank you, Comrade Devashish. Now, with due respect, I request Professor Haragopal to address today's webinar. Professor Haragopal, please.
Devashish Ji and Nandakumar Ji and friends from the banks, this whole federation, I thank you for this opportunity to share some of my concerns or some of our concerns when we are celebrating 75 years of independence. When you look at the contemporary India, I'll come back to that, and look back 75 years backwards. And if you still go further or backwards, then we have to go to the freedom struggle. And I think no discussion today will be complete without certain historical assessment of the present situation. Perhaps where have we gone wrong, or where India started missing its, the spirit of freedom struggle, or what preceded the entire, process. I would say that after India, of course, I keep on telling that today we talk a lot about the Muslims and their exploitation and two-nation theory and all that. But one should realize that entire Muslim rule, see, while they have come and invaded this country, if I can use that expression, but they have settled in India. They have become a part of India. Mughals might have plundered the resources that every feudal regime does, but they have settled and they have become a part. But colonialism is something which has done enormous damage to the national economy, to the nation's development, and they have taken a lot of our raw material resources of this country back to their country, and their exploitation My own feeling is, if you look at the history of Vijayanagara Empire, almost we were on the verge of some sort of capitalist development, one would say. There was a market and diamonds, gold. Of course, if you look at the exports later of India, in the trade, India had a very important place. But once colonialism came and India got colonized, I think Indian economy started taking a hit back. And we have been so weakened that historically, maybe that India would have had the opportunity of developing capitalism, and later perhaps that would have followed by certain socialist revolution or socialist upsurge. But when India or most of the third world countries, so-called third world countries, were to develop, that was the time when they were colonized. And historically, they missed the opportunity of economic development, economic growth. And we remained backward, economically backward, and they started exploiting cultural, social capital. And so with the result, colonialism has done a lot of damage, but today nobody talks of the exploitation of the colonization or the colonizer, but people are talking about the Mughals and what they have done and all that. This is very important. If you look at 1857, first war of independence, the Mughals and the Mughal Rajas and Hindus and Sikhs and all of them fought together. We forget that it was a great battle against colonialism. But again, we missed an opportunity. It was a misfortune. We missed an opportunity. And of course, colonial master, given the diversity, plurality, size, and the princely kingdoms, the feudal, regimes, colonial master, although in 1858, British Crown had taken over and we have come directly from the company rule to the, to the British government directly. Now we find that the type of development from after 1858, the way they manipulated India, the way they divided, the way they carried a war against some of them. And the only difference is these fellows came with a gun, and Indian rulers were still fighting, except Tipu. I think nobody had the modern weapons to fight the colonizer who came with more advanced technology. But anyway, they colonized us, and they started using our economy as a backyard for the development of their economy. And that's how European capitalism owes a lot to the colonies, which were really the places where, number one, they exploited our resources, they have taken the raw material, and of course they used the market to sell their goods. Now, from the late 19th century, again, gradually the forces of freedom started picking up. And by beginning of the 20th century, I think freedom struggle started picking up. I'm not going to minute it. But I think Devshish Ji was mentioning that during the freedom struggle, if one reads the history of the freedom struggle, while the Congress party was in the mainstream and Gandhi was heading that, which part of history has been recorded, acknowledged, but the struggles of the Adivasis, almost, they fought the British colonialism right from almost the beginning. Almost for 2 centuries, we have a history of Adivasi struggles. Then there was a Dalit struggle under B.R. Ambedkar, because they became conscious and Ambedkar started raising the fundamental question that freedom for whom, and what about the oppressed section, particularly the Dalits. Although today Ambedkar is more considered as a Dalit leader, but if one reads writings of Dr. Ambedkar, he was not concerned only with the Dalits, although he was essentially, because that is the most oppressed section. But then he was concerned, he has larger concerns. If you read his revolution and counter-revolution, the type of concerns he had for women and Brahmin women, particularly liberation of Brahmin women, and in terms of his own thought, he wanted nationalization of land, and he wanted critical role for the public sector undertakings. So he had a worldview of his own. And more importantly, Bhagat Singh. If you read Bhagat Singh's writings, was inspired by Soviet Union. And Bhagat Singh has written extensively, although it is very unfortunate that 6 documents that he prepared in the prison about the future of India, about the concerns, his own analysis of India. These documents were smuggled from the jail, and they were handed over to a friend to keep them safe. But since the British were raiding, this friend got frightened and he burnt all the 6 documents. We missed a major worldview that he presented, a very socialist, comprehensive worldview that Dr. Bhagat Singh wrote. Then the trade union movement. I think today Federation has a responsibility to keep on telling the trade union movement that what an important role they played in the freedom struggle. Bombay Workers Union and Calcutta itself, the contribution is very great. Now, therefore, the trade union movement and the working class also had their own substantial contribution to freedom struggle. Then farmers of India, then women of India, several sections of India participated. So freedom struggle is a product of that. And one should also remember that the anti-colonial struggles which were there in Africa and other parts of the world, no anti-colonial struggle, and more particularly India's struggle, ever talked about capitalism, the freedom struggle. Nobody said that independent India will develop into a capitalist, India. Nobody said it. I do not know that if anybody talked about capitalist development and we are fighting for freedom to build capitalism, I don't know whether masses of this country would have participated in that freedom struggle. Everybody talked of social. Gandhi talked about the most last man, the poor man, and the tears of the poor man. And Nehru, of course, was, had his own vision. If you read his Discovery of India, then several of the people talked about an egalitarian, equitable, socially just, India. Now, therefore, the freedom struggle was a struggle for not only just freedom from the colonial master, but the freedom struggle was for equality, justice, distribution of wealth, greater equitable, fair and just society. That is precisely the reason why these aspirations of the masses are resonated in the Constitution of India. Devshishji mentioned about Constitution. Constitution of India is a document with a difference, I would say, because no constitution ever talks about state playing a very critical role in transforming a society, an economy, and the politics. Generally, constitution is a legal document. It talks about the powers of the state and distribution of powers among the state agencies and the rights of the people. But our constitution, in the preamble, is very clearly reflected that what type of India we were aspiring for. That is the reflection of the freedom struggle. And particularly the directive principles of state policy. While introducing the directive principles of state policy, Dr. Ambedkar said that many people may say that what is use of having directive principles when they are not justiciable? Then Dr. Ambedkar says, yes, people, ultimately the development will be decided by people, political choices will be made by people, and political parties will have go to the people because of electoral politics. That Dr. Ambedkar says all that. You may not go to the court asking for enforcement of the directive principles. But then he makes a very profound statement. He says that the directive principles, the importance and value of directive principles will be known when the forces of right wing capture the power. To my mind, this is a caution to the nation that you can always refer to the directive principles as the product of the freedom struggle and as the values that the freedom struggle upheld. So the directive principles, and I don't need to tell a group of this kind, which is very enlightened group, that Article 38 says reduce inequalities in income, status, opportunities, facilities. And Article 39 says that means of production should not be monopolized in a few hands. And wealth should not become detrimental to the common good. Means of production should not be monopolized and should not be in few hands. And the wealth should not become detrimental to the common good. Now, in other words, it's a clear socialist commitment that the Constitution of India made. If you see the entire directive principles, which are also a part of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and all that. Now, therefore, independent India started with a planning, model and the state intervention and state building the, basic sector. They have built a steel factory, they have built infrastructure, they have built IITs, IIMs, the educational system, and major irrigation projects. So the state was trying to build the entire economy, which was completely ruined during the colonial period. Now we started, therefore, all of the entire directive principles reflect the socialist ideology, but then the Nehruvian model was that, Nehru thought that we will have a market and will have a critical role for the state. It's a combination, balancing the market forces and the social forces. That's how they tried to balance. And that's why we started with a mixed economy. I do not know when the market, particularly capital, and also social justice equality, Dr. Ambedkar said that if the right wing takes over, obviously it will completely go for a capitalist model. But then from 47 or let's say 1950 to now 60 Nehruvian era, if you take, you find that during the Nehruvian era, this entire infrastructure, this development has taken place. And when by the time of the late 60s, we find that the unrest in the society started increasing. One of the reasons why the Indian economy has not grown and it got stuck with the 2.5% rate of growth, to my mind, is we have not started with agrarian reforms, what China has done, or what Korea has done, what Japan has done. If you have not brought land reforms, the feudals or feudal relations in the agrarian structure, if they remain, then those forces will not allow the economy to grow. And that's the nature of the entire feudal, character. So the economy was not growing. Whatever you do, it got stuck with 2.5%. And with the result, the unrest increased in the society because on the one hand, wealth was not growing faster, and aspirations of the people, product of freedom struggle and promise of the Constitution of India, they started rising. And between 67 and 71, you look at India, any number of movements, any number of struggles during that period. Autonomy movements, secessionist movements, regional movements, sub-regional movements, Naxal movement, Dalit movement, women's assertion, Adivasis, anyway, struggles, you find a youth of the country. This unrest of the youth in late 60s was there all over the world, very interestingly. French youth, even American youth revolting. That was the, period when aspirations were not met and therefore there is an unrest. This particular crisis produces Mrs. Gandhi. And therefore, unlike Nehru, she started talking about poverty and abolition of poverty or reducing the poverty, Garibi Hatao and all that. Now, once Mrs. Gandhi started talking about poverty and all that, and she said that we have to reduce the inequalities, and then she started certain programs. The capitalist class, which was slightly developing at that point of time, and they thought that if you start talking about the distribution, social justice, reducing poverty, their own accumulation process will be affected. They know their interests. And 1971, Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which prime ministers attend their annual conference every year. So Chamber of Commerce and Industry in the 1971 meeting, they told to Mrs. Gandhi that let cake expand before you. This debate goes on in economics. Let cake expand before you think of distributing. What will you distribute? Let economy grow. Then Mrs. Gandhi said that how much of expansion should take place in the cake before we think of distributing the cake? And what is the size? And she said people have already become impatient. And if the people have become impatient, there is unrest all over. You are talking of the expansion of the cake. People are now losing their patience. And unless you are willing to share a part of the cake, in the long run, it's going to be counterproductive. In your own interest, you should agree to this program. And Dr. Birla got up and said, Mrs. Gandhi has a farsight. She knows larger interests, and therefore let's agree with Mrs. Gandhi's, whatever program she was presenting. This debate took place in the early 70s, that whether cake should expand and distribute and all that. But by 1975, within 5-6 years, you find that the aspirations of, because Mrs. Gandhi's, slogans or Mrs. Gandhi's program or the image or the propaganda, whatever you may say, partly the aspirations of the people started going up, and the richer classes started fearing that Mrs. Gandhi may go too far because she already announced 20-point program. 20-point program comes, part of the Mrs. Gandhi's assertion. And governance becomes very difficult. On the one hand, mass unrest. On the other hand, the pressure of this acquisitive class that, say, don't go too far in these economic reforms. Because she talked about the monopoly restrictive trade practices. She talked of nationalization of banks. And that's how today what we are talking, the role of the banks and all that. She privatized them, she nationalized the private banks, and she talked of land reforms. She talked, several programs. And 1975, on the one hand, the richer classes and the landowning classes in the rural areas started resisting, And in the urban, capitalist class in the right wing, they started asserting. And in the process, there is an unrest of the masses and the resistance of the upper strata, the exploited class. And in the process, she declares emergency. What we have to remember is that emergency in India came in 1975 in the name of poor people, in the name of poverty. That's how the emergency came. That's the difference between her emergency and undeclared emergency that we are now passing through. There is a clear distinction between the emergency now and emergency then. Now, you find that because she went for the suspension of fundamental rights, and of course, then already Sanjay Gandhi, family planning program, state becoming very oppressive, and therefore, in a very diverse, pluralistic society, unless you have a democratic space, and for people to assert, to articulate their own interests, you are not able to meet the needs, the demands, and at the same time, you do not have the fundamental rights, freedoms for the trade union to fight, for the farmers to fight, for the youth of this country to articulate, because the Part 3 of Constitution provides us the democratic space. But the scheme of the Constitution of India is in Part 3 provides us freedoms, and Part 4 provides us the definition of social justice. These freedoms are to be used to realize the goals of the Part 4. That's I understand the scheme of Constitution. Now, if you suspend the Part 3 of the Constitution, how do people fight for social justice? How do they articulate? So therefore, there was a suffocation. And in 1977, of course, Mrs. Gandhi loses the election. Now, I understand once Arun Shourie told me that after the emergency was lifted, Vajpayee, Jayaprakash, and Arun Shourie were sitting in Arun Shourie's house, and Arun Shourie seems to have said, let's not boycott the elections, because no dictator ever goes to elections without ensuring the success. So she has all the information. But I believe Jayaprakash said, you are underestimating the capacity of the people. Common people in this country have a robust common sense. There is a fear in the society. There is a fear. When people meet in large number, in lakhs and millions, fear will go and people will assert. So what all we have to do is we have to mobilize the people on a very large scale. Then Arun Shourie seemed to have said that we should promise in our manifesto that once we come to power, we will have a thorough inquiry on Mrs. Gandhi and all. Then I see Vajpayee seems to have said, no. If once you say that in the election, she will say these fellows are coming only to harassment and all that. We may do it, but we will not say it. So Arun Shourie was telling me that how the politician understand people and how people like me do not understand. But anyway, she loses the election. But the Janata Party was a coalition of multi-class, coalition. There was Communist Party was there, and then the Fernandez was there representing the trade union movement. Charan Singh was there representing. Jagjeevan Ram was there. Morarji was anyway representing the right wing, and the right wing forces at Vajpayee, and that's how they get legitimacy. Unfortunately, what has happened is the struggle against emergency has also brought in the right wing politics into mainstream, particularly Rashtriya, who never participated in the freedom struggle. But Vajpayee has written a book, and Advani has written a book, My Days in the Prison. While all the freedom fighters might have written their days in the prison, but since they had nothing to say about that, but after 77, they were able to say when we went to prison. And so now this coalition did not work. My own understanding is that although we have a class understanding, but Indian society is a multi-class society. In a multi-class society, See, the coalition of the classes, how difficult it is, you can understand with the Janata experiment. They can't carry on, they can't pull on. So the diversity in the country is a strength, but at the same time, it became governance became difficult, and Janata Party, which came with such a massive mandate, collapsed within 2 to 3 years. And Mrs. Gandhi comes back. And when Mrs. Gandhi comes back, you must understand there is a clear, distinct contrast between 70s Mrs. Gandhi and 80s Mrs. Gandhi. 80s Mrs. Gandhi stopped talking about poverty. Harijans and Girijans and small farmers. She stopped. She started talking about Ekata and Akhandata, national integration. I might have attended, I don't know how many seminars in 1980s on national integration. What do you mean by national integration? How do you decode it or deconstruct? National integration is you must live, all the classes must live to learn to live together. This is the meaning of the national integration. And so she started talking, and for the first time, although we have been borrowing from the global economic agencies, first time Mrs. Gandhi decides that the slow growth rate is because, she does not say that it's because we failed in agrarian reforms and all that. But she said we are a capital deficit society. We do not have enough of capital to stimulate the growth. Then what do you do? So first thing is, if you look at Chinese experiment, how did they have the surplus? How did they have a capital? Whatever agrarian surplus was generated, because the agriculture picked up after the agrarian reforms, and that became the capital for China. Whereas in our case, agriculture was not able to contribute to the capital formation. So with the result, the Mrs. Gandhi said, we have to borrow capital directly from the international market. And you go to the international financial agencies, which are absolutely, weapons of the imperialism, weapons of the dominant, global class, and the entire capital comes with a conditions. Structural adjustment and opening the market, liberalizing, privatizing. So the path that we have chosen in the 1950, when we inaugurated the Constitution of India, and 70s when we talked of the social justice and all that, in 80s, you find there is a departure, a very clear departure. And once you borrow capital, the global capital started saying, open your market. Because when you are taking these loans, how are you going to repay? Your capital is not able to, is not dynamic enough. So if you open, we will bring capital and will produce some surplus, which you will be able to pay back. So with the result, the conditionalities come. And I always give the example in my all public speaking. A woman who borrows a new sari from another who had 2 saris and she didn't have a sari. And when she borrows the sari, when they board a bus, she says, don't sit, although seat is vacant, because my sari will be spoiled. Don't eat food because something may fall on my sari. Now, in other words, you lose your freedom. What has happened is that we have lost a part of our sovereign freedom to design, to plan, to intervene, to develop the nation of our choice. And once we have gone for the liberalization, globalization, and privatization, now clearly whatever has been mandated by Constitution of India as a product of the freedom struggle, we started departing. I think this we must understand as a part of the development of independent India. And from then on, see, the 1980s is a very interesting decade. We borrowed the capital and the economy picked up 5.6% rate of growth, which from the 2.5. And there was no war in 1980s, even unrest which we witnessed in 60s and 70s. Even the trade union movements were not as aggressive as they were in 1980s. And you find that by the end of the 80s, nation gets into a deep balance of payment crisis. The BOP crisis is because you are importing capital, you are importing technology, you are importing capital goods, you are also importing certain consumer goods, and your exports are very limited. So when there is a wider gap between the exports and the imports, obviously your foreign exchange balances have come to almost zero. And if you read why we read this book, he's a book. He narrates what has happened, how the gold, which was there with the Reserve Bank, was rushed into the global market, and how it was done. All that he narrates. So by late 80s, now they said that liberalization is not enough. Now you have to go for a full liberalization. And Manmohan Singh, P.V. Narasimha Rao, they are all products of this. Although people say P.V. Narasimha Rao is very learned and all that, I also personally know him, that's a different thing. But Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao, who are praised for rescuing India at that point of time, have completely pushed India into the cobweb of the global capital. So entire 90s, no holds bar, right? And you also find in 90s, when we started going for global, capital and globalization, Bharatiya Janata Party, which was a very marginal force, went for Rath Yatra, Ram Janmabhoomi. Now, what has happened is that culture, which was otherwise left to the people's own way of life, for the first time, religion and culture comes into mainstream politics. Now, why the culture? Because the only way you can divert the attention of the people from growing inequalities and a model of development which has no solution to the mass problems of the people. Now, in order to manage both electoral politics and manage the law and order, so you have to divert the attention of the people, and the one way of diverting attention of the people is from economic issues, substantial economic issues. You bring cultural issues in the place of economic issues, and gradually identity politics, anyway, by then were getting consolidated. So identity politics, caste politics, religion, all these things become very important in post-independent India. So you find that in 1990s and 2000, what has happened to India? And with the result, the right-wing politics using the culture as a weapon and using identity politics, almost in the 90s, they came to power, 99, until 2004. But that politics would also have their own inherent limitations, and therefore the BJP in the first phase loses because its strength was not enough. But you find in 2004, the Manmohan Singh, becoming Congress party winning, and Manmohan Singh, his understanding of Cambridge economics, his commitment to the right-wing capitalist development is well known. I mean, in fact, he was the one first who talked of there are no free lunches. It's written in the textbook. In a country where there is so much of poverty, so much of hunger, so much of unemployment, you can't talk of there are no free lunches. Then you provide job, you provide work. Nobody wants free lunch. But if a man is hungry, he doesn't have enough of work, and you say there are no free lunches. Imagine the magnitude of the crisis. But anyway, during those 10 years, the 9% rate of growth, that rate of growth, for the first time, the entire political discourse, almost of all political parties, start talking about growth in the place of equity, in the place of justice, in the place of distribution, in the place of reducing inequalities. Growth. It has become a mythology. Everybody talks of growth. And by because from the 2004 to 2014, 10 years, Congress party gets a stable government and all that. But interestingly, in 2009, I have written an article on the repressive laws and all that in Economic and Political Weekly. So I was reading my article recently. Then in the footnote, I have said that Congress is sinking. And Narendra Modi is waiting on the margins to take over the power. 2009. Now, for a political economy student, it was very clear that the Congress, the way it has gone for the model, and they are pushing the model and bringing the global capital, privatizing right and left. But then, with all said and done, there was the National Advisory Committee Council, Sonia Gandhi, with all said and done, Nehruvian family, and Harsh Mandar, Aruna Roy, Saxena, they were all members of the. So they started pushing certain welfare programs. So National Employment Guarantee, there's certain things. She started, compelling the government that please go for some welfareism, some welfare programs. That's why Mrs. Gandhi is still, a very important leader, because she still has certain image, some sort of welfare image. And 2014, Congress party loses hands down. Now comes the Bharatiya Janata Party, and particularly with the Modi, fully committed for the global or the imperialist, model of development, so committed that they would, take the policy decisions one after the other. And as a part of that, the capital, both corporate capital, global and national, they joined together. And with the feudal forces in the agrarian structure, they joined together, and they become a formidable force. And with the result, the capital, which is acquisitive, has become so ambitious that they started telling them, government was also equally committed, transfer all the resources to us. With the result, what we were talking of nationalization, this investment started during Congress period itself. Now, of course, this regime said that, okay, we will sell all the public sector undertakings, and we will, of course, they have taken the resource from the Life Insurance Corporation, State Bank of India, then Reserve Bank, what is they are doing? They are all transferring this resource for the profit. And the profit making has reached a point, there is no, no corporate, say ever incurred in loss. If you look at during the COVID period, if you read the Economic Times, everybody was making huge profit, while people were enormously suffering for lack of access to the health, lack of transport. Suddenly people had laboring class started, and the corporate had no responsibility toward the labor who have really built their, their corporate world, who have labored very hard. Absolutely, it lacked even the humanistic view. And we have watched how they walked hundreds of kilometers, a hungry stomach. Now, in other words, but even then, nothing moves. So you start selling public undertakings, and you start talking about the bank. And very interestingly, the debate about the banks is that they are now saying that how the nationalized banks, which are managed by the government, how people's money can be with the government. People's money should be with the people. That means the private sector think they are the people, and government they think is not people. See how the arguments, perverse arguments are built. So therefore, they are saying you completely, denationalize, hand over the entire banks, whatever capital is there, to the people. People means to the private sector. And therefore, now they're talking about, how the banks will be hit, how LIC, all public sector, what we have built, beautiful sectors, what an important critical role they played. People do not even understand what a critical role the banking sector, particularly after nationalization, they failed, particularly in addressing the questions of the poverty, inequalities. But then you start now talking about disinvestment, denationalization, and now they say that government will not manage anything. Government will just manage external affairs, defense, and Nirmala Sitharaman says that we will denationalize everything, including the defense production, and invite the global capital. Now, in the process, the inequalities, Oxfam study says, and Piketty suggests, and several studies have shown. C.H. Hanmantrao recently has written a paper on inequalities, how 1% people control 22%, how 10% of people control 56 to 60% of income, how agricultural, share, which, has 60% of the people, almost 55 to 60%. Their share, when I was a student of agricultural economics, their share was almost more than 50%. Now it has come down to 11%. 3 lakhs farmers committed suicide because there is no support. And what has happened is another factor is that the agriculture, because I come from an agriculture family, agriculture was with all said and done, wherever the farmer was directly cultivating, it's an independent profession. It's an independent profession. They were taking their own decisions. I know that how the seeds, good seeds, there was no difference between seed and grain, and there was nothing like fertilizer, and there was nothing like bore wells, nothing like and the water was drawn through the bullock power, but it was completely independent. But green revolution made agriculture dependent on the global capital. Fertilizer, seeds, pesticide, power, technology, tractors. See how agriculture has been tied to the global capital. That's the crisis of agriculture today. Now, because in the process, corporate, after asking for the privatization of the entire public sector undertakings, they said now we have to get into agriculture. Land is there. And they want corporatization of agriculture. And in the process, the farmers of this country understood somehow the political economy. And when they went on the resistance on the agricultural laws, what government of India brought, they didn't talk merely about the laws. They talked about the nature of the capital, nature of development, nature of the political economy. They talked of Ambani and Adani. They talked all this. They talked of social justice. So the resistance came from farming class. And the trade union movement, I would like to know, because you belong to a very important trade union, you have to reflect that our resistance to the way that the nation is moving, or the way the development is unfolding. Why trade union movement has lost the militancy it had in 1970s and even let's say 98. But why the trade union movement? What are the factors? Because now trade union movement has to rescue this country along with the farming community. So after 75 years of independence, now you find that your economy is tied to the imperialist global capital, against which we fought 75 years back, and we got independence precisely for that. And we promised social justice, distribution of the wealth, a socialist society, a secular society, a free society. Now, that is the promise we made to the people of India. That's what the aspiration of people. But after 75 years, you find that where is India going? People are talk of growth, people talk of a 5 trillion economy, people talk of faster growth, and privatizing education, privatizing health. See, if this is likely to happen, if you do not talk about the justice, equality, liberty, and all that, what is the development for? And where is India going after 75 years, from here up? Where will India be? What type of India? Constitution provides us a vision of what freedom struggle implies what freedom struggle means. Now we are at a crossroads. Where do you go from here? And of course, the central government, state government celebrating freedom struggle, I mean, lot of enthusiasm, we have a lot of things are being, flag being, almost, socialized, you can hoist a flag, all this is happening. Okay, it may all be national symbols and, maybe important. But we knew in 1950, 75 years back, we knew what type of India we should build. But after 75 years, we do not know where we are heading to. And to restore the vision of the freedom struggle, freedom and vision of an essence of independence and constitutional vision and the sacrifice of the people, they made during the freedom struggle. Now, today, we have to recall that part of history. And now we have to retrieve the vision and present an alternate vision, and trade union movement has to present to the people of India an alternative, not alternate, at least the vision that we had 75 years back. And after 75 years, we want a fair, equitable, just, humane, democratic, free India. This vision is likely to be completely ruptured if the present model is allowed to aggressively advance further, because it has no vision. It has only wealth generation. But we have to ask a fundamental question: wealth for what? Wealth for whom? And now almost the regime has come to a point where they're saying welfareism is a liability for growth, and welfareism is coming in the way of faster growth. I am really shocked. I'm shocked because if you do not talk about anything about the welfare of the people, living standards of people, employment of people, growing inequalities of people, a decent, organized, working class. Now, if you do not talk about this and talk about growth, and you may end up like America. Okay, I mean, you may have a lot of growth, but look at American society. What an enormous violence! What an enormous, inequalities. I mean, if you go through Great Divide by Stiglitz, talks about American disparities, how American. And do you want that type of society? Yes, they have a lot of wealth, a lot of growth, lot of prosperity, but for what? The American way of life, American people's living, and the way the health is inaccessible. The way American society develops, it's in a deep crisis, and it keeps on. I mean, you must read Noam Chomsky to say, and what Noam Chomsky says is that American democracy is a formal democracy; it's not a substantive democracy. Today in India, even formal democracy is being distorted. And we have to talk of substantive democracy, people's participation, people's choice, people's freedom, people's rights. I think these are the questions after 75 years of independence. You and me, particularly in the movement, for which I have deep respect. You have to now educate the working class continuously. You have to carry a very powerful debate. And I would request the trade unions not only to talk to its own members, but concerned with the informal sector and concerned with the larger sections of the people and interact with the people. How do we do that? How do we want mobilize the people? How do we raise the consciousness of the people? I think that is the challenge after 75 years of India's independence. I'll stop here, and I have shared some of my concerns, but I'm sure that your group is definitely a group which is whose understanding is much more informed by the people's concerns and people's future. So thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share some of these concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, very much. Actually, today's audience is really blessed with your thought-provoking presentation. We have enough spokesperson for the neoliberalism. But when we hear from personalities like you, it is really a new experience. Today's webinar will be incomplete if we fail to stress upon 2-3 points which you have brought before us. It is in this background I was fortunate enough, or rather unfortunate, to hear the entire speech of our Prime Minister from Red Fort on the Independence Day. There was a deliberate attempt from the side of the Prime Minister, not from a BJP leader, but from the Prime Minister of India, to project some personalities who did not have any role in the freedom struggle of this country. And also there was an attempt to erase certain personalities who played significant role in the freedom struggle of this country. You have very clearly highlighted the role of the trade union movement, the role played by the different streams of the society in fighting against the colonial rule during those periods. The second aspect of your presentation is with reference to the directive principles. We have really upheld how those ideas became part of our constitution. The directive principles of our constitution is really an incorporation of the values of the freedom struggle and where we stand now. And the beauty of your presentation is that you have very well narrated what went wrong in the development of this country, taking the poorest person into account. You referred the path followed by China, Korea, etc., and where India failed. That is, the independent government failed to implement land reforms and address the major sector of the economy. This narration is very significant because on the day of the 75th year of the independence, there was a lot of articles. In one of an article by Mr. Rajiv Kumar, the ex-vice chairman of the Nidhi Ayog, he has the audacity to state that before the independence, this country's economic engines were run purely by the private people, and we did not face any problem at that time. The problem in the economy is in the post-independent period, the then government established public sector in the height of the economy. That is the reason for the setback. This is the propaganda by people like Rajiv Kumar, and they pretend themselves to be very learned people. But what has happened really in this country, even after 75 years of independence, our Prime Minister is dreaming that within the coming 25 years, we will be able to fulfill the dreams of our freedom fighters. I don't know what kind of dream he is referring to. Because in today's India, what is really happening? We are now under a regime of neo-colonialism in alliance with neo-fascism. This is the regime we are facing now. Interestingly, as bank employees, there was another article on 15th August by a historian from Chennai, Sri V. Sriram, with reference to the banking history. In that article, the interesting part is that how the banks during those periods, during the British imperialist period, how the banks were serving the interest of imperialism. Two examples he is referring in that article. The Plassey War, how Robert Clive got the financial assistance from a private bank in Calcutta. The name I forgot. Another reference to the first independence struggle in 1857. How that struggle was sabotaged by the imperialism with the financial assistance by some Hindu banks in Chandni Chowk. It is very interesting to note that the classic definition by Comrade Lenin, the capital created by banks, that is the finance capital, at the service of the industrialist, that is the definition of finance capital given by Lenin. Today, what is happening? Unfortunately, an expert committee by Reserve Bank of India published an article against the privatization of the public sector banks and an alternative perspective. You see what happened within 24 hours? The Reserve Bank of India declined that it is not our ideology, it is not our study, it is the opinion of the individual researchers. Really, very alarming situation we are passing through. The urban minister, Hardeep Singh Puri, made an open statement before the country that the Rohingya migrants will be given accommodation in the flats in Delhi. There was reaction from Vishwa Hindu Parishad. Within hours, the Home Minister and the Home Ministry came out with an announcement. This is not the policy of the government. They are now in detention and they will be sent back to their respective country. Who is ruling this country? Propaganda, Jumla, extra constitutional authorities. Whether the Reserve Bank of this country is independent after 25 years of independence, when the Reserve Bank of India research team, under their collective wisdom, analyzing the economic situation, analyzing the functioning of the banks, private and public, come with an argument with clear reasons. 7 reasons they have highlighted why public sector banks should not be privatized. Immediately, there is pressure on Reserve Bank of India to withdraw their own findings. Comrade Haragopal G advised us the responsibility of the trade union movement to bring these facts to the people of this country. As the leading light in the banking front, it is the responsibility of Bank Employees Federation of India to unite the entire trade union movement in the banking industry. Today, you might have read, Reserve Bank of India has come out with another program of co-lending for small finance bank with non-banking finance companies. You see, what is the background? They have highlighted what is the background. To serve the unserved and underserved. What is this? After 75 years of independence, after 52 or 53 years of bank nationalization, the Reserve Bank of India shamelessly state that still there are unserved and underserved category in this country, and for serving them, what proposal is there? You privatize all public sector banks. The role played by the public sector bank during post-independence, especially post-nationalization period, is a book before the country with full details. And the rulers whom they are serving, whose interest they are serving. If we fail to discharge our duty, to move forward with our responsibility, the posterity will really raise questions before the trade union movement of this country. Our attempt, our efforts to conduct such kind of webinar to enlighten our rank and file, to move forward with more courage, more conviction, encompassing the entire banking fraternity together. We have to be in front of the movement. If today's webinar has contributed a little towards that goal, this program is proved to be successful. With these few words, I request Comrade Venkatramaya, our Vice President, to propose formal vote of thanks. Comrade Venkatramaya, please.
President of today's webinar, Comrade Nandakumar, our chief guest and speaker in the webinar, Professor G. Haragopal, Comrade Debashish Basu, and participants in the webinar. Really, it is a wonderful experience, very inspiring and educative seminar we had. Professor Haragopal is not only an academic intellectual, but a fighter on behalf of the people's rights and civil liberties. It has clearly exhibited in this webinar the spirit of independence movement and the journey of the Indian economy for the last 75 years, and how it has converted into a pure capitalist and monopolist government. As rightly pointed out by Comrade Haragopal, a right-wing government is the root of the capitalist system. It has proved. And Comrade President also have quoted many examples how the economy, people's money, public sector banks, and bank employees are under severe attack from different corners by the ruling class. And Comrade Haragopal has set an agenda to the Bank Employees Federation of India to take the message to the people. And definitely with the spirit and courage given by this webinar, definitely we'll try to fulfill the agenda put forth before us with our might and strength. Definitely we'll try for that. This webinar is very useful and the participants also enlightened by this webinar. I thank Professor Haragopal for his educative and inspiring speech. I also thank Comrade Nandakumar, our president, for his very pointed and elaborate presentation linking the banking industry to the webinar. I thank the leadership of the Bank Employees Federation of India and the initiative of our General Secretary. And I thank all the participants who have participated in this webinar and make this a success. Thank you very much.
So once again, thank you all, comrade.
Thank you.